We can start our lecture, and before that, I would probably like to introduce myself, if there's anyone, and there are someone who doesn't know me or don't know me. My name is Mirsaid Kasymov. I am a teacher of literature in the Canadian International School, and I also do some administrative work there. I like to joke that the only thing I don't do there is swipe the floors. But yes, yeah, yeah, relatable, right? No. Yeah, and I am also a chief editor of a literary magazine, Litera Obscura, which is a Astana-based online literary magazine. Well, now we can say it's international. We have authors from uh, four, I think, countries, so it is international on a huge scale. And I wanted to talk about, as I call them together, Tolstoyevsky. Um, yeah, I wanted to talk about them as a one topic, and I think those who know them, right, they understand why they are a one topic. Um, After a Russian Revolution at the beginning of the 20th century, the whole world started, having interest in Russian culture, anything Russian. Of course, before that, all the Russian books of the 19th century, I mean, the main ones, right? The Eugene Onegin, the Fathers and Sons, and of course, the works of these two esteemed gentlemen were translated into German, English, French, and were read and were known by the elite public, let's say, those who studied Russian literature or were a part of the literary process. So, of course, the writers, the translators, the professors knew about them. But after the Russian Revolution at the beginning of the 20th century, everyone started talking about them. And so today I wanted to sort of put some light on those two guys to understand why are they that big of an event in terms of like on the scale of literary process. Why aren't they only great Russian uh, literary figures, right? But also global ones. And why are they rivals, or were they rivals, should I say, if they were those? And the judging by that title that I put there, rivalry that changed the world. So how did they change the world, and did they, in fact? So the first thing that comes to mind when we say a person who, well, or a book or an artist or an author who changed the world, we always think of influence, right? So what are other aspects of a writer or factors of a writer's development that can contribute to that understanding of how a person changed the world, right? But it's influence. That's the first one that comes to mind. So I wanted to spend a fair share of this lecture talking about how this masters really changed the world, shaped literature and philosophy and other cultural aspects of today's world. And I would like to start with comparing them, or rather, if not comparing, but just giving an understanding to you how they did shape the modern culture. And we'll do it one by one. So one accomplishment of Dostoevsky and one accomplishment of Tolstoy. Okay. So first, and that might be a surprise for some of you, because those things are not very connected, probably per se, but Dostoevsky is responsible for creation of modern Japanese literature. Before that, we had a traditional Japanese literature, which was mostly poetry and some genres of prose. But at the middle of the 19th century, most of those traditions were dead. Or if they weren't dead, they were sort of in a form of stagnation. Okay, so the poets who wrote in the traditional poetry forms like haiku and etc., you know, those Japanese poetry forms, right? they were mostly stagnating. But the Japanese literature did need a new, fresh air, right? A new, fresh understanding of literature. So after the Meiji Restoration, the Japanese authors began to copy the Western authors. They started copying Dickens, sometimes even Zola, the French author. But the most genius one, I would say, of the Japanese modern. When I say modern, I mean the modern genre, right? The direction of art. So it was at the beginning of the 20th century, and the most genius of those was Ryunosuke Akutagawa, here on the right, and he wrote short novels mostly, some articles as well about literature, but mostly short novels. And his main inspiration for his writing was uh, Dostoevsky. And even when he just began his journey as an author, writing his first ever short stories, he would, well, not copy, but let's say cite or quote the Dostoevsky. For example, when he wrote two different short stories based on Dostoevsky's book, which is Notes from the Dead House. And in the Notes from the Dead House, Dostoevsky talks about one of the main topics there is this um, useless labor of people, right? It's like taking a stone here and then putting it somewhere else and then doing the same thing every single day, right? It's useless. You're not doing anything. You're there just to work. You don't do any good by your working. Okay, so this uselessness of labor actually inspired Akutagawa to write two of his short novels. One of the first novels, The Monkey and Half the Life of Daidoji Shinsuke. And in the first one, The Monkey, he says that the thief that was caught on the ship was sentenced to do a useless labor, right? There were two bathtubs with water, so he would just pour have some water from one of those and pour into another and do it one by one, like every single day. Okay, that was his sentence. That was his punishment. So that was one thing. And the second thing was in the Half the Life of Daidoji Shinsuke, he talks about this boy who is studying at school, actually, as a young boy, studies at school. And he remembers how he read Dostoevsky's Notes from the Dead House, and he says that he now understands his characters because his characters thought that, or some of them actually did, commit suicide because of that useless labor, right? Some of them thought of committing suicide of this useless labor. Some of them actually did that, and they strangled themselves, okay, just to finish that. And so that young boy, Daidoji Shinsuke, he thinks that to himself. Imagine that, me as a teacher, imagining that a student would think that on my classes, right? Because the student who studied in the school at the beginning of the 20th century in Japan would understand that studying back at that time, and I think that some of us can relate to that, would mean that you were to memorize, or as we usually say, regurgitate, right? Some facts, useless facts sometimes, okay? They were studying world history, for example, and the only thing that they needed to remember were the dates of when Napoleon Bonaparte married Josephina or something like that, okay? So it's not a useful piece of information in terms of application it to your real life. So he thought of that. He was a rebellious kid, and he thought of that, like, why would I do that useless thing that, like, my whole life, right? So he was thinking of strangling them himself at the lesson, just like Dostoevsky's characters did. Okay, so Akutagawa took those things and used them as an homage to Dostoevsky in his own short stories. The second one was the third one. Sorry, those were the two. The third one, the Cobweb, one of his most famous ones. The Cobweb explains this story of a great sinner. Okay, a person who did a lot of bad things and was residing in hell for that after death. And so Buddha actually took him out of that hell to the paradise because once he saved a spider. Okay, so that actually correlates with, if I heard that some of you read Karamazov Brothers, right? If any of you remember what Grushenka tells there, a good fable she tells, right, about the lady with the onion. Do you remember that? So there was this good fable told by Grushenka and the Karamazov brothers when she says that there was this a old wicked woman who lived in one sort of a village or something, and she was uh, um, drowning, right? She was drowning in hell, right? And the angel he wanted to save her, and the angel comes to her and tries to save her, but he knows that he cannot do that without God's permission, right? So he comes to God and tries to think of only one good thing that she did in her life, because she was a wicked woman. She never did a good thing in her life. So he starts to think, what was the only good thing, at least one good thing that she did in her life. And apparently, when she was young or something, or at least not that old and wicked, she fed an onion to a beggar woman. Okay, so she gave an onion. And so he tells that to God. He says, she gave an onion to a beggar woman, hungry woman. He says, okay, test her, give her that onion, let her take that, let her hold that, but then try to pull her out of that, whatever it is, right? The pond or whatever that she's drowning at. Try to pull her out of that. And if you can do that, you can save her. If you can't, she can drown there for eternity. So he tries to do that, but whatever it is, whatever the end, I'm not going to spoil that if you want to read Karamazov Brothers. But that's the parallel that Akutagawa drew with Dostoevsky, right? So Akutagawa's character was saved by Buddha just because he once saved a spider, although being a great sinner, and burning in hell for that life, sinful life. Just like Dostoevsky's this old wicked woman who was a bad woman and a wicked woman, but once in her lifetime gave an onion to an hungry beggar. So that's how just parts of Dostoevsky's stories influenced Akutagawa, who will be the one who builds a foundation for the modern Japanese literature. And every person who studies Japanese literature would say that this is a beginning of a new Japanese phenomena that we call, well, there is a Japanese Japanese literature phenomena, because after Akutagawa, it was like an explosion, right? There were one by one genius authors occurring, taking the stage, and some of those even winning Nobel Prizes in literature, like Yasunari Kawabata or Kenzaburo Oe. And some of those were almost, like, let's say, they were supposed to win, but they died young. For example, Yukio Mishima, right? He was supposed to win the Nobel Prize, and he was nominated for that, but he died very young before getting one. So all of them were the followers of Akutagawa, who was a follower of Dostoevsky. So we can say that Dostoevsky was the inspiration to the whole Japanese modern literature phenomena. Same, just like Dostoevsky, Tolstoy also was a reason for creation or happening or occurring of a new literary phenomena of the huge region. Do you have any idea of what region I'm talking about? No, there was Chinese literature before. I'm sorry. Siberia. No, there's no such thing. I'm sorry. Any other ideas? No. No. Yes, the whole Latin American literature happened because of Tolstoy. So there were two of the greatest Latin American writers, Jorge Luis Borges and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and both of them created their literary phenomena because of Tolstoy, or thanks to Tolstoy, right? So when Borges was thinking of creating this new uh, new direction of, or choosing or finding that new direction for Latin Americans to present themselves in the cultural arena, um, he was thinking of Tolstoy. He said that there is no such a writer who can be greater than him. So why not we? Why won't we? Why shouldn't we be? Why can't we be? Why may not we be his students, his disciples, right? So he started analyzing Tolstoy. He read the whole thing, the whole Tolstoy thing, all his novels and articles and everything, and nonfiction as well, that we will talk about today. And then, of course, he passed that torch to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who was inspired a lot by Tolstoy, but also Hemingway, who was inspired by Tolstoy as well, right? So we can say that the whole, and by the way, before Borges, there was no Latin American literature at all. There was an oral tradition, right? An oral poetry tradition, songs tradition, etc. But there were no writers like literature. There was no literature in Latin America. So we can say that Latin American literature also came to life because of Tolstoy's influence and inspiration. Let's go back to Dostoevsky. There's a whole scientific discipline that was created because of Tolstoy's inspiration, right? And that is psychoanalysis, because Dostoevsky had a huge influence on the psychoanalysis patriarch Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was analyzing Tolstoy's characters. He was sort of um, debating his colleagues at that time, because some of the colleagues thought that Dostoevsky was a schizophrenic or a maniac or something like that, or even a pedophile, or blah blah blah, or a lot of different speculations. But Freud was genuinely fighting them, explaining that Dostoevsky wasn't a schizophrenic, nor he was a pedophile, and the only sin that he had was killing his father by wanting it. Okay, that's when that's when Freud came with that Oedipus complex, etc. thing, right? When the son always is attached to his mother, etc., sexually also, and by wanting his mother, right? He actually wanted his dad to be dead, right? So, but that was the whole speculation by Freud, which was at the end, um, criticized by other later scientists. It was his own crazy thing, and he even wrote a huge book about that, Dostoevsky and Parricide, where he talks about Dostoevsky wanting to kill his father. Right? He didn't, by the way. If some of you doubt that, he didn't, but that's what Freud thought of him, and Freud was also analyzing his characters. For example, he wrote a huge essay on Stavrogin's Confession. Stavrogin is a character of one of the Dostoevsky's most famous novels, The Devils. And so he analyzes that. He also analyzed Raskolnikov, the character of Crime and Punishment. And he analyzed a lot of characters from the Karamazov brothers, etc. So he he did a lot of work, uh, and he found out a lot about human psychology just by analyzing Dostoevsky himself and his characters as well. Another huge influence, even on a political and social level, was made by Tolstoy, because there were two key figures in the world history, or let's say in the history of the 20th century, that fought for freedom. And if I ask you to name them, you would probably name them. Two main figures who fought for freedom in the 20th century. Who are they? They're Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, so Gandhi hadn't met Tolstoy. They never met, but they had a correspondence. They were pen friends, and Gandhi says that. I'm sorry. I'll show you the quote. Gandhi says that when he read that book, "The Kingdom of God is Within You" by Leo Tolstoy, he thought that all other books seemed insignificant in comparison with the independence of thought, deep morality, and sincerity of Tolstoy. Right. So when he first read, and well, probably he was unlucky if the first book of Tolstoy that he got in his hands was "The Kingdom of God is Within You." Probably he would have been more luckier if he had, I don't know, Anna Karenina or War and Peace, right? First. But "The Kingdom of God is Within You" is a nonfiction book of Leo Tolstoy where he talks about his religious views and his desire to create this new religion, which would later be called Tolstovstvo, right? And it's a branch of Christianity, but also has a lot of has a lot to do with Buddhism and other different practices from the world. And of course, Martin Luther King Jr., who was inspired by Gandhi and by Tolstoy to fight for equality and freedom, is also one of the big admirers of Tolstoy. Uh, and yeah, that's a quote from Gandhi as well. So Leo Tolstoy's life has been devoted to replacing the method of violence for removing tyranny or securing reform by the method of non-resistance to evil. He would meet hatred expressed in violence by love expressed in self-suffering. And we'll talk about suffering a little bit more when we will discuss their philosophical and psychological views, both of them, the Dostoevsky's and Tolstoy's. So we'll talk about suffering a little bit later. They also inspired the whole artistic movements. For example, Dostoevsky inspired Expressionism. When we talk about Expressionism, if we try to simplify it in a way and try to understand the most basic concept, Expressionism is an art of fear. Okay, is a form of art that was circled around the feeling of anxiety, fear, nightmare, right? Why? Because expressionists, well, they were expecting the world war, right? They felt that it's coming in the mid 1910s, right? They knew it was coming because they felt that nerve of the society. They thought and they were right that the society was ill. Okay, and there should be one cataclysm, the huge apocalypse-like cataclysm that would sort of cure the whole society. And again, we will talk about that worldview a little bit later, but that worldview had inspired two of the greatest expressionist, expressionists probably in the history of literature and visual arts. So in literature, it's Franz Kafka, the writer of or the author of Metamorphosis and The Trial, and we'll talk about those a second later. And also Julius Meyer Graffe, a German artist who sort of was the founder of the Expressionist movement in Germany. For example, one of the friends of Graffe, Emil Nolde, also German painter, he created this picture in 1912 called The Prophet, and he then confessed that while he was creating that, he was thinking of Dostoevsky. And after that, this picture was put on Dostoevsky's book as a cover, as a cover of The Devils. Okay, so we can say that the whole expressionist movement, which had a huge influence on the whole art arena, right, of the world, was inspired by Dostoevsky. And if we talk about Dostoevsky and Kafka a little bit more, uh, in Kafka's uh, novel, the Metamorphosis, the only novel that he finished in his during his lifetime, and the only novel that he wanted to publish, actually, um, he talks about Gregor Zamza, who, and it's apparent from the first sentence, right, who, when woken up one morning, uh, turned into an ugly insect, right, a bug. So um, this work of Kafka's is widely compared with Dostoevsky's novel *The Double*. First reason to that is that both of those, and even it was even before the creation of the expressionist movement, everyone out, well, every scientist, every, when I say scientist, I mean, of course, the researchers of Dostoevsky, everyone says that this is probably the first ever expressionist novel written in the history, right? Because the character of the double, um, being sort of, um, what would you say, that divided, right, or even, no, multiplied, because he was then doubled, right, um, didn't think of that. He didn't have any spiritual or philosophical values. He was living his life, his mundane, simple life, as he was living it for the last years, right? He didn't think of any, like, nothing happened. Okay, now I have a double, but what's from that? Okay, I cannot do anything with it, so let's just live my life, right? He was thinking of going somewhere, buying something, etc., etc. The same goes with Kafka's Gregor Zamza, right? Because the first thing that Gregor Zamza thinks after realizing that he is an insect now, he thinks of how he dislikes his boss. He thinks of how less he earns, how little he earns, and how poor his life is. Okay, so that's what he thinks about. He doesn't think about, okay, turning into an insect or a bug, right? He doesn't think about that. He doesn't think of reasons why he turned out to be an insect. He didn't think of anything. He didn't think of, okay, how my life will change because of that. He thought, okay, now I need to go to work with my boss that I hate. Okay, so that's what both Dostoevsky and Kafka hate about people. They hate people who are not philosophical or spiritual. Okay, and even that, well, Kafka, of course, Dostoevsky didn't say that or didn't claim that, but Kafka will, because the time will pass and he will see the horrors of the 20th century. He will say that people lost their connection to God, right, or to the transcendent. They don't think of anything other than their pockets, other than their stomachs, right? They don't think anything about that, or they don't think anything other than that. So that's the again, the transformation that we see from Dostoevsky's thoughts, who were very early, who were too great for his time, right? Who were very early in the 19th century, and and then their transformation, and then their, or probably I should say, formation in Kafka's ideas in the um, early 20th century. Of course, as Dostoevsky inspired Expressionism, Tolstoy also inspired a huge movement which was called the High Modernism. Dostoevsky inspired James Joyce and Marcel Proust, two of the greatest writers of the 20th century. One is the author of Ulysses. Anyone who read Ulysses? uh, and the Proust is author of the In Search of the Lost Time. Anyone who read that? Because those two are considered to be the most difficult books to read. And funny enough, but they were inspired by Tolstoy. There's a joke related to Tolstoy. Um, why to use 1,000 words when you can use 10,000 words, right? So that's why Joyce's and Proust's books are so long, because they were inspired by Tolstoy. They were sort of competing with him. They wanted to write a book that would be longer than his one, right? Which a very natural thing a man would do, right? Yeah, compare the sizes. Yes. Yeah. um, so that's what it is about. What there is about, and of course, this list of their achievements or influences or inspirations. It's not exclusive. It's not complete. Okay. So there are much more people and much more authors that were um, inspired by those two giants. We didn't talk about Nietzsche. We will talk about it a little bit later. We didn't talk about Thomas Mann or even Alfred Nobel, who was inspired by Tolstoy, by the way, and other great figures of history, both political and art related. But there was one Russian philosopher and poet who was trying to analyze both of them, kind of a thing that we are trying to do now. And he said that his name was Dmitry Merezhkovsky. And he said that the meek power of Tolstoy, meek means gentle, if you don't know, right? The meek power of Tolstoy is completely opposite and yet similar to the rebellious power of Dostoevsky. Here, as in everything important, they are twins, two diverging branches of one trunk, the opposite members of one body. So he was, of course, thinking of them as very different entities. But he and as any other researcher of both of them, he couldn't not see, right, the similarities between them, and they were indeed similar. They thought of a lot of things in the similar way, or should I say, they thought of a lot of things similarly, but in different ways. Yeah, that's what I would like to say. And so the next part of the lecture, I'll try to explain you the differences in their views. We won't talk a lot about their works, about their books, because I don't want to tell you about the books. I don't want to retell the contents of the books, right? But I heard from some of you that you, at the very beginning, you said that you came here partly to find some motivation to read these authors, right? Or reread, probably, if you touched them already in a way. So what I would like to give you here is uh, the understanding of what values each of them had, what philosophy each of them followed, and what personal qualities or even spiritual qualities both of them had, so that you can understand who, like, or whose works you're reading, right? Even if you haven't read any of those, you might find some similarities between yourself and any of those or both of those, right? Any of those, two or both of them. Um, yeah, we'll talk about their values mostly. So both of them derive, if we can use that word, from two of the greatest writers in Russian history, Alexander Pushkin and Nikolai Gogol. Um, Mostly, when it comes to foreign people, right, foreign readers, not Russian-speaking readers, they know Dostoevsky and Tolstoy much more than these two, much more than Pushkin and Gogol. Well, Pushkin is a little bit known because Eugene Onegin is sort of a theatrical diamond, right? It runs in all the theaters in all the countries in the world. But Gogol is usually forgotten, undeservedly forgotten, being the most genius writer of the Russian history. And both of them derive from, well, both of them, meaning Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, derive from both Pushkin and Gogol, taking their humor, which is very unconventional thing when we think about Tolstoy and Dostoevsky both, right? They're not very humorous guys, we think, which is wrong. They are very humorous, and I will try to talk about that. But what differs them? Let's talk about that. So, first of all, of course, well, let's start from the surface. First of all, of course, they come from different backgrounds. Well, both of them come from the aristocratic backgrounds, but Dostoevsky's were what we call a like poor aristocrats, right? They lost all their fortune, and their familia, right? Their genealogy wasn't that rich. Tolstoy's genealogy was full of people who were close to the czars or the tsarinas, right? The kings or queens, as we call them in Russia, the Tsar and Tsarina. Um, so um, uh, so Dostoevsky wrote about people he saw in his life, poor people, right? And even his first ever published novel was called Poor Folk, right? So that was, and Dostoevsky, of course, wrote about people he saw all his life, which were great aristocrats, right, close to the Tsar. So yeah, so that was their reality. That's why they wrote about that. So this is quite understandable, although this is the beginning of their uh, different paths, right, and probably the explanation of them. Another difference is that they were using the different mediums to think about people, because both of them were humanists, of course. Both of them thought about people a lot, and both of them were people loving dudes. But they thought of people in a very different perspectives. I would like to call Tolstoy a sociologist and Dostoevsky a psychologist. Dostoevsky thought of a person as a universe. He thought of a person as a unique uh, um, example, right? As a unique entity, and he tried to study a not a persons but the persons, right? Each different person's nature. He knew that they all are different, and he didn't consider looking at the person as a part of a society, which Tolstoy did. He was a sociologist and a historian of some sort, and he thought of people as masses, as crowds, as societies, as communities. Okay, so he thought of people as many, and Dostoevsky thought of people as one. So that was there also this philosophical, psychological worldview difference, and that's why I also like I always like to call Dostoevsky the widest, and sorry, the Tolstoy the widest and Dostoevsky the deepest. Yeah, in terms of human nature, Tolstoy understood the widest range, right? He looked at people from the wide angle, and Tolstoy was the one who would, just stab you and then put his finger in the wound and try to find what's there, right? He was the one who would really deeply go into people's nature. There was another difference that they had, and it was a political difference. And it is actually very up to date today, right now, because Dostoevsky was a very Russian patriotic one, right? He thought of himself as Russian, and he even wrote that we are not Europe and we should not live as they live. Blah blah blah. Very familiar conversations, isn't it? Right? Like we hear them sometimes now today as well. But Tolstoy was a what we call now a global citizen, right? We like that phrase, right? And he thought of Russia as a part of the world system, part of Europe, probably part of the whole world, and he thought of his patria to be the Earth, right? Not Russia. His patria wasn't Russia. So that was their political difference. Another one was worldview difference, and again, it's very relatable to all of us. Um, Let me do a small survey here. Please show of hands who considers themselves a pessimistic person. I'm not. Okay, so we have some pessimistic people. Show of hands who consider themselves to be optimistic. Okay, so that was also a big difference between these two guys. Dostoevsky was a huge pessimist, and Tolstoy was a huge optimist. And both of them, this is an interesting topic to discuss. Both of them knew, they understood that the society, people as a race, people as a biological kind, people as the whole are sick. But Tolstoy wanted to cure them. Tolstoy saw the result of that treatment. He saw his patients well. He saw that end of the tunnel, right? But Dostoevsky said, no, they're sick, and they always be sick until they die sick. Okay, and so of course it's the simplification of their philosophies, but they were genuinely different in those worldviews. Um, Tolstoy believed in people. Dostoevsky was disappointed with them. Okay, so that was the huge difference that made their work so different. Uh, and remember we talked about suffering, right? And I said that we will talk about suffering a little bit more. Um, so they were very different in terms of their relation to suffering. Again, both of them understood that life is full of sufferings, and that's okay, right? And I hope that we all understand that, because it's a cruel world, right? Sometimes. But their understanding of suffering was very different. And it's a very schematic showing demonstration of their understanding. But Dostoevsky thought that suffering is a price you need to pay to be happy and free. If you wanted, well, let me explain it in simple words. For example, if you want to be free, right, or happy, it's like if you want to have a house, right? You need to accumulate some funds to do that, right? You need to have some budget. You need to save some money. You need to have some money. So a currency to buy happiness and freedom is suffering. And the more you accumulate, the more chance you have to get into that degree of happiness and freedom, right? If you want to be free, you need to be suffering. If you want to be happy, you need to suffer a lot. But that implies that there is a point in a human being's life where you can give it all out, right? I'm suffering for 20 years. I'm accumulating that, but then I'm buying my happiness for that suffering. So I'm giving it away. Now I'm happy. Okay, that implies that. Very simple mathematics. But Tolstoy didn't believe in that. Tolstoy said and accepted that a very Buddhist doctrine, that suffering is a condition of life, like air or water. You cannot live with them. They like you cannot get away from them, right? You cannot give them out. If you want to live, you need air and water and suffering, right? And you can, even if you like, you cannot give them away just to be happy or free. It's not a currency that you, it's not money that you will, it's not a price that you'll pay. It's something that sticks up with you for the whole life. Okay, so and that's where the basics of Tolstoyevsky come from. The the combination of Christianity and Buddhism of some sort. Okay, so he thought of uh, um, a very unchristian thing, let's say, because a Christian thing is that because Jesus suffered and then he was resurrected, right? He and then went to the heavens without any suffering there. But Tolstoy thought of the different concept. He thought that suffering is something that will never end, and it shouldn't end, and it is a condition of life as water or air. So that's a very interesting thing to think about as well. Another thing is that, um, let's say, let's talk about characters of theirs and of themselves as well. So Dostoevsky's characters, if you read the books, are doubtful. They're full of doubts. They don't know what to do, where to go. Even if they decide to do something, they then try to reconsider it. They sometimes betray themselves. They sometimes, and by the way, Dostoevsky tries to judge them in that way. So he says, don't, like, you can betray whoever you want, but don't betray yourself, right? But to be honest, Dostoevsky was the same person, right? He would be betraying himself whenever there was a chance to do that, right? He said, I will never gamble anymore, but the next chance, whenever he got some money, he would go to the casino, right? Well, casino is a loud word, but yeah, to the gamble house, let's say that. So yeah, he was a conflicted, troubled person, and of course his characters were like that. They were doubting, they were self-betraying people, right? And they were very undetermined, let's say, right? They didn't know anything about themselves. That's why they're always testing themselves. Remember Raskolnikov, right? He did his uh, three people murdering thing just to test himself, right? Because he didn't know what to stand for. He didn't know what to believe in. He didn't know what he was, how he was. He didn't know if he was strong enough to do that, or brave enough to do that, or smart enough to do that, or wasn't he? He didn't know that. That's why he did that, to test himself. And then he was thinking of confessing that, right? But then again, he was doubting, should I confess? Shouldn't I? Blah, blah, blah. So he was always doubtful. And that's how Dostoevsky was in his real life. But Tolstoy was a man of dedication. And so his characters are. They have high ideals, they have big dreams, they do whatever it takes to become whatever they want to become. And Tolstoy was like that. He was a man of action, a man of dynamic. He wasn't a very weak person, but, well, he wasn't a very strong person as well. He sometimes would betray himself as well, his ideas as well. But his ideals that he betrayed were, should I say, petty? I mean, he considered himself a vegetarian, but he liked steaks. Well, something like that, right? So it's not a big spiritual ideals that you would betray, right? He thought that he said, like, okay, eating meat and killing animals is bad. Is there any sort of kebab there, right? So yeah, that was just it showed in it, like, he showed those um, um, small betrayals of himself, let's say, right, of his ideals, but never was he unsure of his big dreams, big ideas. Okay. Another thing is that, well, the other aspect that I wanted to talk about them is how they see people, right? Because that's how we know people, is how they treat other people, how they value other people. And they valued very different types of people because they were different, as we now see. Um, Tolstoy valued spiritual people, and right. Tolstoy said, if you like, uh, even if you're poor, if you're stupid, if you're, I don't know, lame, whatever, like, you can think of any excuse, right, for that, to not to be a normal person, which is, of course, a vague concept and strange concept. But whatever you are and however you are, if you think of spiritual, if you think of God, if you ask yourself philosophical questions, if you try to connect to that transcendent end, right, another end, if you try to um, see yourself in an abstract form, you're good. I like you. That's what Tolstoy's attitude towards people was. Uh, but Dostoevsky's attitude was different. He liked he liked strong people, people who can fight, who can struggle, who can withstand those sufferings that life would throw upon them, right? And he was a stoic in that. That's why I like that picture. He was a stoic, right? Uh, he accepted the suffering. He said, "Yes, we need to suffer." Remember that, right? Both of them accepted suffering, but one thought that it's endless. That's why it's spiritual, and another one thought that it can end. You just need to endure enough, right? For long enough, let's say. So you need to be strong. You need to be enduring. You need to be stoic, and after that, you will be rewarded for that, right? For that stoicism, for that endurance. So they valued different people around them, and they were in that term also philosophically very different. But the main conflict between them, and actually the only conflict between them, because they've never met, and when I say rivalry, I mean this is a unique case because in the history of 19th centuries Russian literature, it was like a book club. All of them knew each other very, very well. Pushkin was a good friend with Gogol. Turgenev was a good friend with Saltykov-Shchedrin. Saltykov-Shchedrin knew Dostoevsky, and everybody like Chekhov knew Tolstoy, etc., etc. Okay, so they knew each other, and well, but not and but um, this thing of them never meeting is actually very strange, right? Because again, everyone around them knew each other, but they have never met each other. Even to the extent that once they were at the same event, but never met. Okay, that was very weird. And when they found out that they were both at the same event, and by the way, well, not they found out, but Tolstoy found out after Dostoevsky's death when he talked to his wife. He once met his wife after Dostoevsky's death. Tolstoy was surprised when Dostoevsky's wife told him that they were at that event back at that time when what Tolstoy said, right? So yeah, sometimes they were very close, but never met. But one time, I think it was Dostoevsky's wife or someone around him who showed Tolstoy's article, I suppose, or essay, where he thinks of Christianity. And he thinks of Christianity, and more specifically, an Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Christian church, of something that is corrupted, of something that is that failing the Jesus, let's say Jesus's rules and laws and teachings and whatever, right, and thoughts. So he said that, and when Dostoevsky read that little bit of an article, he said, "Oh no." That was the only thing that he said. That, "Oh no," right? He was disappointed because, of course, they read each other's books, right? And they loved each other in a way that rivals can like each other, can love each other. Sometimes they had mutual respect. But when Dostoevsky read that bit, when he understood that Tolstoy is now against the Russian Orthodox Christian Church, he said, "Oh no," right? So and that was the only conflict actually that they had during their lifetimes, because everything that I explained before was sort of a superficial, right? They didn't think about that. They didn't write each other. They didn't text. They didn't write letters to each other. They didn't think of each other. They didn't. I mean, they liked sometimes what they read. When Tolstoy read, I think it was The Gambler, he said, "It's a nice book," right? And when Dostoevsky read Anna Karenina, he said, "Well, yeah, that's a nice book." Yeah. But they've never thought of what I explained before. They never thought of those different ideologies that they had or different worldviews because they didn't know each other. They couldn't know what his worldview is, right? But there was one conflict, and it's religion, of course. and not only the religion itself, because they could, I think they could just close their eyes to the different religious views. But what Dostoevsky couldn't forgive Tolstoy for was his opposition against the church. Right? It's not that he wasn't a true believer. Right? He was opposing himself. He was trying to create a new religion. That was something serious for Tolstoy. But let's talk about their views on Christianity in general. So both of them, and this is interesting, both of them considered the Christ, Jesus Christ, to be a human. And Dostoevsky liked that idea. He liked that a mere human being can turn into God. He wasn't God at the beginning, he thought. He liked that idea of transformation, of, again, redemption, of atonement, right? Of suffering, that what he suffered that much so that he can pay that suffering then, right? He can give that away and become free and happy, right? But Tolstoy thought of Christ even less. He thought of him as a human being, a teacher, a great teacher, but a human being nevertheless. Um, he never thought of him as a god or something, and he never thought of anyone as a god. That's why he said. That's why he wrote this book. The kingdom of God is within you, right? Everyone has a bit of a god in themselves. He said, and he taught, and that's why we don't need this icon. We don't need this personalized God figure. Every one of us is a God in its own right, right? So and he loved Jesus Christ when he was giving the Sermon on the Mount, right? This that the illustration of which is on the right. He loved that Jesus. He loved Jesus, the man, the person, right? Not the wonder creator, not the mage, not the wizard, right? Not the god, but a human being, great human being, but a human being nevertheless. So that's basically it for their differences, philosophical differences, and the only conflict they had during their lifetime. They didn't think of each other a lot, but that was the only conflict. Again, probably Dostoevsky had with Tolstoy. There was that his own conflict, right? Tolstoy didn't think about that as a conflict. He was like, okay. And even when Dostoevsky died, he wrote that I loved him. Never met him, but I loved him. He was a great author and probably the only one who could understand me. Yeah. So what I want to finish this block with is to say that, and that may sound a little bit romantic, but probably the best way to see these two guys, and I can say that, and I can call them guys and fellas and everything, because I am also a writer and a philosopher, and I feel for them. I understand both of them, and it seems like I knew them for my whole life, and I talked to them. I talk to them every day. I drink tea with them. I have dinners with them, right? So that's why I can be very familiar with them. So these two guys are very different, of course. But the thing that we need to remember, the thing that I want you to take away with you after this lecture, is that even if they thought of things from different angles, they thought of the same things. And they wanted the same. They loved people in the same way. Yes, one was cruel, one was saint, let's say, right? In his philosophical views, not in his life. One was psychologist, another one was sociologist. And one was a rebellious one was a gentle one, right? So another one. They were different, but the things that they wanted from people, the things that they wanted to for people to become, was the same. The thing that they wanted was the same, and that thing is actually very simple, and probably not the first thing that would come to a mind of a normal person reading them, which is um, to prolong this life on this planet for as long as they could, right? To delay the apocalypse. Um, they failed, both of them, because the apocalypse came, right? There were two world wars that they were afraid of. And they sort of, well, I can't say they predicted them, but they felt them, right? Again, this feeling of horror and terror and losing that bond with the transcendent that Dostoevsky felt, and Tolstoy's feeling of people dividing and secluding and separating from each other, etc., etc. Right? Again, thinking of the same thing from different perspectives, right? Dostoevsky thought of people losing their bond with God, and Tolstoy thought of people dividing more and more into smaller and smaller groups. Both of those things would lead to the World War, right? So again, they thought and they feared the same thing. So when you read, or if you read any of those, or I would suggest you read both of them, well, not at the same time, but probably one after another, right? uh, just like we did today with the lecture, right? One was affecting that, one was influencing that, etc. So try to just do a challenge. Read two books one after another. You can choose whichever to read the first, but you can read, let's say, War and Peace and Crime and Punishment together, right? Well, one after another. um, let's say in a week or in a month or in a year. It depends on your pace, but two books, right? Those two books. If you are crazy, you can read Anna Karenina and Karamazov Brothers, right? The best books. But if you're not that crazy, you can read the lighter books, right? Um, but the thing that I want you to think about is how similar they are. It is very easy. I made this presentation in, I don't know, like an hour or so. It is very easy to show how different they were because that's on the surface, right? The main thing is how similar they were. And they are indeed two different branches coming out from the same trunk. They are the tree of the world literature, and they come from the same trunk. And what is needed to be seen is that trunk, probably even the roots, right? But not that branches that go other like different ways. Um, so what I think I forgot to tell about something. Yeah. Oh yeah, about the humor. Yeah. Um, so the thing is that when people, and this is even this applies to even professionals. My literature teacher at school thought that Dostoevsky was gloomy and dark and depressive, etc. Right? And yes, he was, but he also was comedic in those things. The thing is that when you accept, here's the point, I might get a little philosophical, so you can stop me and throw something at me whenever you, you are annoyed with me. But the thing is that whenever you decide that suffering is something that you accept, you don't run from it, you don't escape it, you don't want to get rid of it. You just stoically accept it, right? Your life becomes a little bit more comedic because the one of the tools to deal with the tragedy of life, and probably the most effective tool to deal with the tragedy of life, is laughter, right? And whenever you accept that yes, your life is tragic and everyone's life is, you start looking for those small comedic things. For example, Dostoevsky. I I remember the episode. I can't remember what book what it was, but probably was the Notes from the Dead House. But he writes that. Um, he's walking down the street and he sees a horse there who's not eating the what do you call that, What are the horses usually eating? I'm sorry? The hay, yeah. So, and it's not eating the hay, but it's looking at it as if it wanted to eat it, right? Which is itself a humorous scene to see, right? A horse that doesn't eat but wants to eat and looks at the hay just like with that hungry expression. So he walks down the street and he passes by that horse, and the horse is trying to reach that hay, but for some reason gets irritated by the character, and so reaches his collar and bites him for the yeah, bites him, bites his collar and tries to pull him, but then stops again. It doesn't pull him. It just lets him free, and then stares at him as if he was guilty of something. Right? The character was as if like you're as if telling you were passing by while I was trying to eat. Right? So that scene alone is so humorous when you read it twice, three times, when you understand the whole absurdity of that. Uh, it's such a it's not a very organic piece in that book, right? Because that book is about suffering. That book is about the tragedy of the Notes from the Dead House is a tragic book. But you read that and you're like, what is happening? What he was in a probably he was in a good mood that day when he was writing that bit, right? But the thing is that he was actually a very humorous person, and sometimes in those small bits you can see that. Sometimes when we analyze his short stories, which is also famous for, not many people know that. People know Dostoevsky for his huge novels, right? But not many people read his short stories. I advise you to read his short story titled Crocodile. It's the funniest or one of the funniest pieces of literature in Russian history, Russian literature history, right? It's The premise is very simple. Crocodile eats a person, and that person is somewhat of an authority, sort of a mayor or something. I can't remember exactly, but and that person doesn't die, so he tries to speak to his subordinates through the crocodile, right? Right. So that is a funny story. Uh, Dostoevsky can be spooky as well, right? But and gloomy and moody and aggressive. Um, but he is funny as well. He is not um, a typical depressed. Oh, probably he was a typical depressed. By the way, I think he was now I'm thinking that he was a typical depressed person, because if you've ever met depressed people, truly clinically depressed people, those are the people who laugh a lot, right? They don't sit there sad and upset just thinking how bad their life is, right? Depressed people can laugh, and they can see the humor in life, and they can see the comedy of life. They can't deal with it, they can't cope with it, they can't do anything with that, but that's why they laugh, right? Have you seen the Joker? Right? See, they can be humorous. The humor is usually quite weird, but they can be humorous. Depressed people laugh, and that's what Dostoevsky shows us, right? He and well, if you read his novels carefully, you will see that there are a lot of those small humorous bits. Um, Tolstoy's view on the humor was a little bit more open and obvious, because he wrote about that. He wrote some articles about humor. He said that if there's no laughter in the life, there's no life, right? Um, but his works were sometimes too serious, and that's what his bad side comes out, right? Because well, if you judge Tolstoy just by what I said before, it seems like uh, Dostoevsky was this pessimistic, depressed one, and Tolstoy was this active and dynamic and blah blah blah, right? But he wasn't a perfect person, of course, uh, not perfect at all, but uh, yeah, and the let's say the the negative side of his character, I would say, for myself personally, was sometimes he was too serious about himself. Um, but he stated a lot. He claimed that he liked humor. I don't know if he did actually. um, Dostoevsky did, and we can see that. But Tolstoy claimed that he liked humor. That's a little bit different, right? Uh, yeah. So if you have any, well, that's all from me. Thank you. And if you have any questions regarding these two friends of mine, you can ask them. I'll try to reply. Yes, please. Yes. Trash, both. Both of them, yes. Well, the thing is that, if you want me to get a little bit deeper in that topic, um, the thing is that both of them, I must say, I hate to say that, but both of them were very narcissistic. And the thing is, and again, it's something that people need to consider when they're dealing with uh, genius people, sorry, or someone who is close to that level, right? Genius people are difficult to live with, right? And Dostoevsky was, people say that he was a misogynist. He wasn't. He just he just didn't like. Well, it might sound weird, but he didn't like women to get educated and free. Yeah, yeah. He was he he wasn't a misogynist. He loved women. He loved gentle, soft, humble, religious women. He didn't like educated, cultured, uh, free, emancipated women. And that's the time when women began to become emancipated, right? There was the beginning of all the women emancipation, and well, yeah, he hated it. Yeah, he hated it, and that's why he kept his wife sort of a slave in a way. Of course, she wasn't a slave per se, but he kept her typing. She was a good typist, a stenographer, as we would say, right? But she was a good typist. So he was a very nervous one, and he was before he started writing Karamazov Brothers. All his novels were written in a very short period of time. I think his record is 28 days. He wrote the Double or the Gambler, probably, like the one of his most well-known novels. He wrote in 28 days. Um, Mostly because he was always in debt, because he was gambling a lot, and so he needed a lot of money, and so he took some money from the publishers in advance, sort of like, I'll give you the book by the end of this month, so give me the money. So they gave him money. Okay, he needs to give a book right by the end of the month, so he wrote a book in a month. So he was always in a shortage of money, and that's why he wrote books quickly. Before Karamazov Brothers, he did that. Karamazov Brothers took him quite a long time, and he dreamed of that. He dreamed of writing a book slowly, just getting everything right, And he accomplished his dream with Karamazov Brothers. And because he needed to write the books very quickly, and he couldn't type very quickly, so he asked his wife to help him. Don't think she had a choice, but but yeah, she did. So she was always typing for him. So it was sort of a slavery. um, but he wasn't a misogynist. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Well, yes, people call him a misogynist. He loved women. That's what I say. He loved a very specific kind of women, but still. Um, Tolstoy was a little bit different. Is that he loved women too much? Yeah, and some people, all kind of women, and all kind of too much. Yeah, and some people estimate that he had about well, I think that's a speculation. I don't think it's true, but some historians and some well, yeah, historian. Let's say historians estimated that he had around 300 children, his wife, which is crazy. Yeah, but even if you had half of that, it's crazy, right? Even if you had like so that's a huge story, right? So yeah, he loved women a little bit too much. But his wife, Sophia, um, yeah, she was struggling, of course, because yeah, because of that uh, love that he shared with a lot of people. Yeah, his wife, poor Sophia. Yeah, she was struggling with that. Imagine your husband being the greatest person in the world, as many believed him to be, and just having affairs here and there every single day, a new one, right? So that, yeah, that was a difficult thing for her. So I can't say they were happy in their personal lives. Probably Tolstoy was. His wife wasn't, but probably he was. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, to be that about this, the greatest person in the world. There's a nice story from Maxim Gorky, the greatest, considered to be the greatest Soviet writer. When he came to the Yasnaya Polyana, where Tolstoy was residing, it was his residence. When he came there, Gorky came to Tolstoy, and Tolstoy, I think it was something like 1908 or something. So it was 2-3 years before Tolstoy's death. So he was back at that. He was a huge person, right? Yeah, probably he was considered to be the greatest person alive, right? Because he was classic, a classic. He was considered to be the greatest author of the generation. Uh, yeah, and he was by that time people were following him for his this new religion, right? So there were a lot of factors to consider Tolstoy to be the greatest person in the world. And when Gorky came to Yasnaya Polyana and saw saw Tolstoy, I think it was a pond or a lake. I think it was a lake, and Tolstoy was sort of leaning on a huge stone, and his feet were sort of right on the edge, right, where the waves would come, right on the edge um, of the lake. And Gorky says that I saw winds and waves whispering the news to him. So he considered him to be the wizard, right? Like the nature was speaking to him. The waves would come to his feet and just tell him whatever is happening in the world. The winds would come and whisper to him, right? So he was that of a figure, that great of a figure, because people who saw him were fascinated. Yeah, and I think uh they could forgive him for everything, right? Because yeah, he wasn't an ideal human being, far from that, but they could forgive him for that because when they saw him, they were fascinated. And another one, probably that was Gorky as well, when they came and talked to him. Gorky, yeah, it was Gorky. Gorky said, um, I'm not an orphan anymore, now I have a father, right? And he said that no one's an orphan anymore. Every orphan in the world has their father in Tolstoy, right? He is sort of he is Jesus Christ, Buddha, whatever to people, right? He was this heavenly father, right? But earthly father, probably. Yeah, yeah, earthly father. Yeah. So people would see him in that light. People would be fascinated by him. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, Dostoevsky was a famous anarchist in that term. Yeah, he was.